Cool, so I'm extremely excited to be here today. We have a ton of awesome product updates to share. As Dave and I were kind of preparing for the presentation, we were kind of looking back at 2017 and then looking ahead, and we're like, how are we gonna fit this all into a slide deck? So we did our best to choose some features we wanted to highlight, and then you can meet us at the Genius Bar later to ask whatever questions you want. But before I get into the product slides, I'm gonna actually share the most important message of this entire deck, the most important slide of this entire deck. So I'm obsessed with Giphies. I have the physical condition of being a millennial, so I apologize for that. But I did want to say thank you. We have the best customers in the world, and the reason I say that is not just because you buy and use our products, but because you actually partner with us to build them. So thank you for that. With you guys, we've been able to touch a lot of lives. So my journey at TinyPulse actually started just about a year ago, so I can't take credit for this number, but I can definitely take pride in it, and we all do. So we kind of thought to ourselves, how do we get to the next 350,000? How do we get to the next million, 10 million? And there's really just one answer to that, and that's by listening to you guys and continuing to get your feedback. So we really spent a lot of time in 2017 doing this. We went out to Boston, did a customer roundtable there with our CS team. We had events in San Francisco and Seattle, tons of customer interviews. I recognized a lot of faces last night from folks that I'd interviewed. And we really built up a whole treasure chest of customer feedback. And with that, we built a ton of cool stuff over the last year. So I won't go through each one, but the way we'll do this is I'll actually share a couple categories of things. So the first is gonna be stuff that's live today that falls within making admins' lives easier. And I'll share 3 things that are live today and then 1 thing that's coming soon. And then the next will be about really getting into the context of the employees. So how do we improve response rates by integrating and getting into the context of where employees spend their lives and where they live, because they're not in TinyPulse 24/7. So I'll share 3 examples of that, and then I'll share 1 that's coming out soon. So with that said, one of the things that always comes up, because it's so core to the TinyPulse administrative experience, is question management. So for those of you who were at TinyCon last year, this was also a theme. So actually our number 1 requested feature this year was to make that a little bit easier. So being able to drag and drop as you're scheduling questions, being able to have 15 questions ahead so you can plan. So that was kind of one of the first things we did to just make question management a little bit easier, and this is the first of a series of question management features. So another thing is, I get asked a lot, is flexibility in questions, so different question types. I'm actually gonna switch gears a little bit, and I'm gonna ask you guys a question. So we have some pretty cool events planned later today. We have the happy hour, we have the party, and we also have Dine Around. So out of those 3, who's most excited for the happy hour? No one is excited. Okay, we have a couple people. Colin's excited, thank you. How about out of those 3, who's most excited about Dine Around? Ooh, quite a few. How about the party? Well, one more thing you can be excited about is multiple choice questions like the one I just asked you are now available in TinyPulse. So this just makes it a little more flexible to collect data from customers, and it's just one other way to ask a question, from users. So the next thing I'll share here, this is one thing that comes up quite a bit. So currently with TinyPulse, you have 1 pulse, as you know, it goes out to your entire company. So a lot of times I get people asking me that, hey, we sent out a question to the entire company. It had to do with career development, and we found that specifically in the marketing segment, people weren't scoring very high. So we want to follow up on that as we make changes. So down the road, can we, in addition to the company-wide question, ask a specific question to the marketing segment as an example, or to the product segment? So By the end of next month, you will now be able to send by segment. So in addition to your standard, okay. So again, making life easier for admins. So I shared a couple things that kind of talked about ways to schedule, ways to have a little more flexibility with questions. But once you get all that awesome data back, what do you do with it, and how can we make that easier? So last year at TinyCon, you might remember we talked a little bit about Visualize. So what Visualize does is as data responses and suggestions come in, it actually automatically categorizes them using machine learning and sentiment analysis and text analytics as negative or positive. It also puts them in culture driver categories. So you can quickly see a ton of people are talking about career development in a very negative way, or a ton of people are talking about salary and benefits in a very positive way. So last year we announced that. What we're doing now, this is actually from a specific customer call I had where they told me we love Visualize, but what we really want to see is when we see that there's a culture driver that we want to influence change through, we create a program, we change things around, and we want to see if that really had an impact. So over time, if, for example, salary and benefits was very negative, we made a programmatic change to improve that. Does that actually then pan out? Are people talking about it in more of a positive way? So now, in this example, it's actually career path. You can actually press play and see over time, over a time period of your choosing, how your culture drivers are trending. So it's a very quick way to be able to see how the changes you make ripple through the organization and the results you get through responses and suggestions. So those are kind of the 4 ones I wanted to highlight around making admins' lives easier. And now I'm going to flip a little bit to the next set of things. So we asked ourselves, where do employees and where do our users live? Not geographically, but where do they spend their time? And as I mentioned earlier, it's not always in TinyPulse. It's in Slack, it's in G Suite, it's in Outlook. It's in productivity tools. So we have invested pretty heavily in integrations. The first one I'll show you is actually with Slack. So you can actually respond to pulses directly inside of Slack, send cheers, send suggestions. And we've gotten a lot of great feedback. Actually, I think Leah's actually in the room somewhere. Hi, Leah. So I'll give Leah a little shout out. She has a presentation at 4, that session you guys should join. But she really loved the Slack integration, and it helped them skyrocket their response rates, and they called it a real game changer. The number on the right of the slide is actually not specific to Leah's org, but across all companies that have used our Slack integration, response rates have gone up about 17%. So this is another way to really get in context of where users are instead of having them have to come to TinyPulse to respond to their pulse. So the next thing we did along those same lines is an Outlook integration, and this was just so far with a small beta group, but come to the Genius Bar and talk to us some more if you're interested. And this actually allows you to respond to your survey inside the email. So Microsoft has their Ignite conference next week, and they're going to demo this, but you guys get a sneak peek if you come to the Genius Bar since you're here for TinyCon instead. But through actionable messages, you no longer have to click on an additional link. You can now actually just respond directly inside of the message, and this will soon be available to all Outlook users. So along the same line, so for those of you who use Outlook, this is another really cool one. So Cheers, as has been talked about in previous presentations, is such a core piece of TinyPulse. Recognition really ties into engagement in many ways. So what this does is an Outlook add-in you can download. With actionable messages, you don't need to download. This is an Outlook add-in. And you can actually, as you get an email from someone, so in this example, Ashley sent me an email, we're ahead of schedule in something, and I have that kind of cheers moment, that recognition moment. So I want to be able to respond directly there, pull in the add-in. It'll actually pull in Ashley's email address because she sent me the email, so that happens automatically. I can type a cheer and send it. A lot of times, in the current state, I would have had to remember to send her a chair. I would have gotten busy with my email, but here you stay inside the context of email, and then you can continue to do the rest of your tasks inside of email. So that's a big one. And this actually also works inside of Calendar. So there's been many times where I've had, a meeting that went really well, and I just wanted to recognize everyone that attended. Or the organizer, and I'd have to, leave the meeting, remember to send a cheers. I have to look up who was in the meeting. I don't want to forget someone on the cheers. But now with this Outlook add-in, you'll be able to start by replying with a cheers to the organizer and eventually to attendees as well. So again, it kind of keeps you in your context, and you're able to, quickly fire off that cheers instead of remembering to do it later. And the next one, this one is coming soon. We're super excited for this. So how many of you guys love sending cheers? Quite a few. How many of you love receiving cheers? Well, now with our Tango card integration, you can actually add a little oomph to your cheers and send a tiny gift card. So in the previous, one of the previous presentation, Amy from the Red Sox was talking about sending gift cards. But now we're allowing folks to actually add, through the power of Tango card, gift cards to their cheers. And this is completely controlled by admins. So if you decide to turn it on, you'll control the budget. In the first launch, admins will be the ones responsible for sending them. But it adds just a little more to the recognition experience. And I'll also give a shout to Tango Card. I know they're sponsors of our event, and I think you guys have hopefully checked out the booth. We're doing a couple raffles, and you can also pick up $10 Tango cards if you go to the booth directly behind that wall from me. But we think this will be a big one, and this will be available next month. So I shared a lot of things. Let me just summarize, and then I'll turn it over to Dave to take you on a journey into the future. So stuff that's available right now, multiple choice questions, drag and drop. I know a lot of you guys have already been using that. Visualize, training over time. And then the integrations I mentioned are all live with the exception of Tango Card, which will be next month, and Send by Segment will also be next month. So with that said, Dave, I'll leave the clicker here. Welcome Dave Haju to the floor.
Wow, I'm so amazed at how much stuff's going on, and sometimes my head is down, and I just don't even realize how much the product guys are doing. In fact, Preem has been moonlighting as a wedding planner for his own wedding that's coming up on Saturdays. Let's all give a big hand. So if I was given the whole conference, I could probably talk to you guys about all these different things were going on, but BJ was really stingy with me and only gave me 15 minutes, so I'm gonna have to break it down into just 7. But before I do, I want to ask you guys a question. How many of you are using LivePulse? Okay, who doesn't know what LivePulse is? Okay, so a little bit earlier, Francis talked about the importance of sharing and being transparent, and an interesting statistic is that the clients that have enabled LivePulse are getting a 50% higher participation rate from their employees. So I repeat, a 50% higher participation rate. And when I talk about participation rate, I mean answering surveys, sending cheers, giving suggestions. And in LivePulse, I'll show you what it looks like here for those who don't know, you're able to see a stream of things going on, you're able to vote on the suggestions, you're able to comment on the suggestions, and you can see a feed of cheers, you can like cheers as well. And so making the application more conversational. So LivePulse has been really instrumental to what we do at TinyPulse. And as much as we talk about things a lot and we're transparent about things, they slip through the cracks. So a little while ago, we were using Slack, paid version. And as we started growing, we thought this is getting pretty expensive. And Slack has a free version. So in meetings, in the hallway, we started asking people, what do you think if we downgraded the free version? And people said, yeah, why not? Downgrade. So we did. And we saved $8,000 a year. And a couple weeks later, a suggestion came up. And they said, hey, we're really missing out on some key things. So we're losing the history of our delight quotes from our clients. I'm not able to send stuff now because of the file size. And that suggestion got 60 votes out of 90 employees. And immediately that got raised up in our leadership meeting, and eventually Slack was back. And thank God for that, because the integration is actually pretty awesome. So the reason I'm talking to you about Live Pulse is because this first new feature lives in Live Pulse. Last month, I was able to visit our client Sands in Macau with David. And when we got there, they said, hey, we're going to tour you this innovation lab. And I thought, wow, I'm going to see like a new blackjack table or something cool like that in the casino world. But it was actually their HR department. And it floored me, because we walked into this place, and on the wall, they had these awesome sticky notes, some of them powered by Tiny Pulse, and they were suggestions from people. And they had basically a backlog of items of things that they wanted to do. And from that, they used this to get consensus from leadership, and then they drove change, and then they shared back to their employees. And I thought, wow, this is absolutely phenomenal. About the same time, in our engineering department, they were holding a hackathon. So a hackathon is 24 hours where they eat a lot of pizza, drink Red Bull, and try to code something. And so I was sitting there judging in the morning, and the engineer got up, and he said two things before he started his presentation. He said, 80% of all wins come from a suggestion. Okay, cool. And he said that, as an employee, he felt like if his voice was heard, he was more likely to contribute. I said, okay, great. The result of that was this, a reimagining of our wall of wins. And what this does is it prioritizes your virtual suggestions by votes or by recency. From there, I can click into it, I can participate in the conversation with my team, and decide if we're going to move something into progress. And again, this all lives in Live Pulse, so the employees can see what's going on. And then, as HR professionals and CEOs and directors, all of us are using Tiny Pulse because we're doing stuff about it. But the problem is, oftentimes our employees just don't know. And so with this wall of wins here, as soon as I move that to the done column, it allows me to create a win and then share that back with my team. So a card will appear back in the Live Pulse feed that people can then like and show their appreciation for it. And you can have this nice feed which you can actually put up on a TV screen. So actually a very, very awesome feature. So earlier, David talked about coming out of your comfort zone and coming out of our comfort zone and really trying to find ways that we could expand our product and understand from hire to inspire to retire. So as leaders, we all understand that some of the most important time in someone's career is the first 30, 60, 90 days. So in a growing company, it's really hard to keep tabs on that. And we create onboarding programs, different departments do it slightly differently. Sometimes there's best practices that go on over here that are not shared over here. Well, now with our new onboarding dashboard, it allows you to get a quick glimpse and understand exactly how you're doing against this. So here what you see is a timeline. So I can see how many people are being onboarded. I can see what the results are of the questions that they're being asked. And we currently ask questions in week 1, 2, 4, and 12, and those questions are customizable. Actually, when we first released this, they weren't customizable, and we had such a backlash from our beta users that we made them customizable. So we are listening to you. Next, you can see a breakdown, and so I can see each of the questions. And we also ask a pulse that's about how do your current employees feel about their ability to onboard, and all that stuff is here. And I can quickly see that my marketing team's having some trouble. Next, I can see the pulses themselves and the scores, and I can quickly glimpse the feedback. And here's a preview of what it all looks like. And so as being part of a fast-growing company, oftentimes I didn't even know who the new people were in Seattle. And so this view actually allows me to click through really quick, send some recognition and cheers, and actually welcome them to our journey. But the beginning is not all, right? There's also the end. And when somebody has already left your company, there's nothing you can do about it, but there's so much that you can learn from it and apply to make sure that doesn't happen again. And so the problem with that, though, is most of our data lives all over the place. It might be in the mind of a manager. It might be in an HR professional spreadsheet. It could be nowhere, right? But now, with a few clicks, you can put that data into Tiny Pulse. You can track your attrition rates over time. You can see your recently exited team members. You can click through to a profile and see why and what might have happened. Again, you can see a breakdown of attrition by department. And again, I see marketing as kind of my red flag in my company. And then finally, there's various pulses that we actually already ask in Tiny Pulse. How likely are you to be here in 6 months from now? How do you feel about our company's ability to retain our top talent? And now all this stuff is in one place. So you might ask, why should I enter exit data into Tiny Pulse when I do it somewhere else and I have these other options? Well, when I first showed Frances, our lovely friend who spoke earlier, this exit dashboard, she said what would be amazing is if I could click through and I could actually see the life cycle of this team member. Well, if all this data is in one place, we can tell you an amazing story about how they started, what happened while they were there, and what happened when they left, eventually giving us a better ability to do what a lot of us want to do, predict risk for attrition, right? So I thought to myself, why wait till the end to show this thing? Why not have a profile in the very beginning? But before I get to that, I got another question. Who uses segments and filters here? Okay. Who loves the awesome process of manually maintaining your segments and filters and keeping them up to date when your company is changing? Nobody? What? It's my favorite part of Tiny Pulse. Well, a lot of us actually view our company through hierarchy, right? And I've heard from various companies that I'd love to be able to see as I drill down into my company what that looks like. So I'd like to introduce you our first feature that really helps you cut through the clutter and find those problem areas, and that's hierarchy. So with a hierarchy here, I can take the CEO view, I can start with my direct reports, and I can again see, wow, Mark's having some problems, but I can also see over here in operations, we've got some issues with attrition that I might have to deal with. So the first thing I'm gonna do when I see this is I'm gonna click into Mark. And now I can see some interesting statistics about him, right? And I can see that he definitely has problems in multiple areas. But I know in the past, Mark's a high performer. He's actually done a great job. His team has some high performers on him, but they're marching towards a release that's 2 months down the road, and they're probably working really hard. So what I'm gonna do is I wanna dig into Mark's profile, which happens to be my third favorite innovation. So here, as I look at Mark, actually I have to stop. So one thing I have to remind you guys is this is the future. And as Prem said, we really look at everybody as stakeholders in our roadmap. So earlier, David was like, I don't know if we should show this stuff. And I said, no, I want to show this stuff because this is our one opportunity to be here with 200 of you and to get your feedback. And so I'd love to hear what you think about the idea of having an engagement index or a talent potential index or some of these new things that you're seeing on the screen. So back to the profile, as you look at this, what I see is Mark. I see his engagement over time. I can see his performance. I can see he's actually a high performer. And I want to give him some coaching. So the first thing I do is I'm going to add some feedback, and I'm going to use Prem's really cool calendar integration and schedule a one-on-one with him. And I'm going to tell him, Mark, it looks like your team hasn't been recognized lately. I feel like they're working very hard. Let's discuss this. I'm going to give you $50 in Tango card certificates that you can give out to your team for coffee and send them some cheers. Next, I want to get start a feedback loop with his team, right? So I want to be able to collect some feedback so that next when I have this one-on-one, I can effectively talk to him and give more perspectives than just my own. And then his performance record is all in one place, and I can see Mark's been doing a pretty decent job. Finally, I want to give him some encouragement, right? Because it's very important that he feels like he's valued, because I do know he's a high performer and he's probably going through some struggles. So I sent him a Tango card. But what's cool about Cheers is it's a feel-good feature, but it's actually recognition is a really critical metric. And so Frances talked about this a little bit, where they ran some studies and they saw that if you're giving and receiving cheers and there's a drop-off, it's actually an interesting indicator of attrition. And we found that it's about 3 months prior to that you see that happening. And last year there was actually a study that Microsoft did on a very similar note around centrality. And for those of you not familiar with that KPI, centrality basically tells you where a person sits in the company, and are they a hub? And are they a hub with a lot of spokes, and are those spokes far-reaching? And if they are, if you lose that person, it can be a very, very painful experience. So I've coached Mark, I've looked at his thing, given him some feedback, I've used send by segments, I schedule a pulse six weeks from now to track progress, but how do I keep up with it, right? Well, in the current world, that would be a big challenge for me right now. I'd have to go to different places. I'd have to figure out what's going on with onboarding and all that. And I'd have to keep looking back every day. But in the new world, let me show you how I can do this very easily. So in our new vision of advanced reporting, I've got 3 templates. I've got a health template that gives me metrics. I've got a feedback template that actually gives me the responses. And I've got a people template that actually gives me some visualization of the people in my group. So the first thing I do is I go into my filter, I filter down to marketing, I add a few things I want, and I schedule this so that it sends it to me once a week. And here's the magic. Now imagine you're going to work on Monday, hopefully using an Uber, not driving, and you get an email. And that email has this beautiful report in place that has all this information that you need about your marketing team so that when you go into your one-on-one with Mark, it's all there at your fingertips. And now you're better able to coach Mark to the finish line with real data, real feedback, and you've done it effortlessly. So as amazing as that is, it's not my favorite feature. My number one favorite feature is what we call tiny tiles. So you've seen 11 things so far that make your life easier, that engage your employees more. But I used to think, man, how awesome would it be if I could just go to this dashboard and have this customized view of my company that had every bit of information that I want right now. So let me introduce to you tiny tiles. So tiles are pieces of information, and they're about the various culture drivers, various things that are important to you. In this particular scenario, we knew Mark's team didn't feel very recognized. So as I create my custom dashboard, the first thing I do is I grab a Cheers panel and I bring it in. Next, I know they've got 2 new people coming on board and I want to track that, so I bring the onboarding tile. Next, Engage is going to give me feedback every week about different pieces of the company, so I'm going to pull that in. And finally, I want to know if anybody leaves, and I want to track this right here. So now with just 4 clicks, I've got all that information right at my fingertips so that I can properly think about how to maximize my talent potential. But that's not all. I feel like if we really want to help you cut through the clutter, we have to give you some insights, right? Sometimes when you're looking at data still, it's just data. And so what we've developed here on the top panel is our concept around actionable insights, where in this case, we've got a couple that make sense. So marketing has dropped below the benchmark for recognition, so I know I need to do something about that. But engineering is actually giving a ton of cheers, and so I want to make sure that I connect with that director and give them the recognition that they need for being great, and more importantly, connect them with Mark. You know, let's have a lunch together. Let's talk about why it's going so well here, but why not over here, right? So that we can properly share information and build a better culture. I'm running out of breath. But I know that the number one thing in Slido is probably when you're going to get this stuff, and so I wanted to summarize what we saw before. So available today, we've got these items that Preem talked about. Multiple choice questions are there, drag and drop, being able to see visualized trending over time, Slack integration, Outlook add-in, Outlook actionable messages. So over the next 30 days, you'll see send by segments, you'll see tiny gift cards, you'll see tiny tiles. So actually we're using that right now at Tiny Pulse, and we've got our first tiles on board. And what I would love is if, for you guys, or there's pieces of information you want to see, give us that feedback, because we'll be developing a lot of tiles over time. Wall of Winds 2.0 on the action board, we're also using at Tiny Pulse right now, and you should see sometime in the next 2 to 4 weeks. And 30% of our clients are already using onboard and exit. We have a new design that's coming out based on that feedback we've gotten, and the rest of you will get that over the next 30 days. In the labs, so when I say in the labs, we're testing this out on our guinea pigs, and we're coming up with ideas around indexes and trying to figure these things out, but we've got Live Pulse 2.0 that'll put even more things into that employee feed and get them more engaged. The talent potential index. We feel like, if we want to maximize talent potential, we got to measure it, right? Who's here? Tableau is here somewhere. Where are you? Ah, there we are. So we use Tableau all the time. It's awesome, right? It helps us measure our statistics on our product, and we want to give you a better way to measure those statistics on your team. Team member profile, being able to get all the information you want about a person. Now, granted, some things are anonymized, but things like the happiness of their team, how much recognition or not, and we can actually learn a lot from that. Advanced reporting. So this is, I think, just an amazing innovation. We'll be rolling that out slowly, or I should say in quick iterations, not slowly, but the whole thing you see is going to take some time, but over the next few weeks, you're going to start seeing more and more advanced flexible reporting coming out. And then company hierarchy, we're actually using this as well in production right now at Tiny Pulse. So we're looking at what pieces of information we can add to that. And we're also looking at how do we protect anonymity. And so that's kind of the last remaining challenge that we're working through. And then finally, the ability to add coaching feedback and start feedback loops. So with that said, if you want to be a guinea pig, please do email me, because I'm looking for early adopters, and I know most of you all are here because of the fact that you want to learn more and you want to do more. And so please do email me. I'll be around the rest of the conference, and I'm looking forward to talking to you, as will Preem, as will David. And to leave, as a former client of Tiny Pulse, which I was before I joined, and a current power user, I've never been more confident in our ability to truly maximize our talent potential. So with that said, I thank you guys very much, and I'd like to bring David Nielsen back up to the stage to take you guys to lunch.